So yes, you saw what happened here. The Australian Prime Minister must have said something behind closed doors, getting President Trump to then stand before this big crowd and say, we'd consider rejoining the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Our next guest was the U.S. Undersecretary of Commerce, who spent years essentially laying the groundwork and putting up the scaffolding for that multi-country trade back in the day that President Trump swiftly exited when he became president. Stefan Selig is joining us now in a Fox Business exclusive. Stefan, what did you think? I mean, honestly, when you look at this, the Australian Prime Minister said specifically, the U.S. is our most important strategic and economic partner.
Well, I think that's quite true for Australia. I don't think the president said, to your point, something very different that he said in Davos, which it is something he would consider rejoining in the future. But he also said that he prefers bilateral deals to multilateral deals, and this is the queen of all multilateral deals. When it was TPP, it was a 12-country deal. It also is going ahead without us. So on March 8th in Chile, the other 11 countries are going to enter into the CPTPP, which is a mouthful, and is a watered-down TPP light that essentially, Liz, has about 20 separate provisions which are going to be excluded from the original TPP, all of which were actually quite important for U.S. businesses.
I look at a stat that the Australian Prime Minister gave, and I think President Trump looks right when it comes to bilateral deals, so you get to convince me otherwise. He said that since 2005, the bilateral two-way trade deal between Australia and the United States has actually increased trade up 50%. We now have a trade surplus of $25 billion with Australia versus a deficit like the likes of what we have with Mexico and China. Why not do specific trade deals?
Well, that's true, but he also complains about our bilateral trade deal with Korea, where we run a trade deficit, which was our most recent bilateral deal that we've negotiated. So I think it's hard to draw conclusions from one particular bilateral deal versus multilateral deals.
The Australians buy a lot of cars from us. They buy passenger vehicles and civilian aircraft, medicinal equipment. Obviously, we have telecom, pharmaceuticals, too. That's their way. Those are the things we export to them. Then we buy meat products, pharma, medicinal equipment, wine and beer, because, you know, that Shiraz, that Australian Shiraz.
Foster's.
I'm less interested in what we buy from them than what we sell to them. If we start slapping all kinds of tariffs on the TPP group, is it possible that Australia would say, fine, we'll just buy our cars from Japan and Korea? We'll buy Hyundais and Nissans.
Yeah, I would be surprised if we start putting tariffs on our former TPP partners. Don't forget, those other 11 countries are fundamentally amongst our strongest allies in the world, and they represent such an important and growing part of the economy, which our businesses need access to. So I think that is not something that is likely to be a concern for U.S. businesses.
Well, Ford is higher right now. Maybe we can put up the auto stocks. General Motors is pretty much flat, but I just think that this might be an interesting perspective when you have the Australian Prime Minister saying, we depend on you, we like you. That may convince President Trump.
Well, that is,
back to TPP.
You know, that is the whole, argument for trade. And it is really not just an economic and commercial argument. It's also an argument about the ability for America to exert power and influence around the world.